On the morning of the 8th of August 1944, the most feared tank commander in the German army drove north across an open field in Normandy, in broad daylight, with no infantry around him, straight toward a line of trees he could not see into. 15 minutes later, he was dead. His Tiger tank, the steel monster that had made his name across 2 continents, lay burning with its turret torn clean off the hull, and the man who most likely killed him was a 21-year-old former shoe factory worker named Joe Ekins, sitting in an ordinary Sherman tank, firing his gun in anger for the very first time in his life. This is the story of Michael Wittmann, the poster boy of the Waffen-SS, the ace credited with more than 100 destroyed tanks, and the strange, almost poetic way he met his end, not at the hands of a better duelist or a secret wonder weapon, but to the exact kind of cheap, mass-produced machine his Tiger was supposed to make obsolete. To understand why that ending matters so much, you have to understand the legend that came before it. By the summer of 1944, Michael Wittmann was not just a soldier, he was a brand. The German propaganda machine had built him into a household name, the kind of figure ordinary Germans read about in newspapers and saw in newsreels. His face was on magazine covers, his exploits were broadcast across the Reich, and the number attached to his name was staggering. He was credited with destroying around 138 tanks and roughly 132 anti-tank guns. Now, that number deserves a careful word. It was a claimed figure, built and polished during the war, for a country that desperately needed heroes. Most of it came from the Eastern Front, in the brutal fighting against the Soviet Union, where confirmation was loose and the appetite for victories was enormous. We are not here to verify that tally tank by tank, and you should be suspicious of anyone who treats it as gospel. What matters is that the German public believed it. The German High Command promoted it, and the man himself had grown into the living symbol of an idea. The idea that one perfect German machine, crewed by one perfect German soldier, was worth a dozen of anything the enemy could build. He had come a long way to earn that reputation. Wittmann was a farmer's son from Bavaria, born in a small village, the kind of background that gave the propaganda writers exactly the raw material they wanted. He joined the army in the 1930s, then moved into the armed wing of the SS, the Leibstandarte, an elite formation tied directly to the regime's inner circle. He learned his trade in armored vehicles, first in lighter machines, then in the assault guns that crawled through the mud of the Eastern Front. And it was there, in the vast tank battles against the Red Army, that he built the foundation of his fame. By the time he climbed into a Tiger, he was already a decorated veteran. The Tiger tank suited the legend perfectly. It was huge, heavily armored, and armed with an 88mm gun that could punch through almost anything on the battlefield at long range. To the men who faced it, the Tiger was a nightmare. Its frontal armor shrugged off shells that would have destroyed any other tank. Its gun could kill from distances where the enemy could barely scratch it. On paper, and often in practice, a single Tiger could dominate a whole stretch of front. But here is the detail that the propaganda never mentioned. The Tiger was also a deeply troubled machine. It was monstrously expensive to build, soaking up resources that Germany could not afford to waste. It was mechanically fragile, prone to breakdowns in the gearbox and the running gear. It was heavy enough to bog down in soft ground and to crush the very bridges it tried to cross. And Germany could only build them in small numbers, while the factories of its enemies were turning out tanks by the tens of thousands. The Tiger was a thoroughbred in a war that was about to be won by workhorses. That contradiction sat at the very heart of Wittmann's story, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud in 1944. For a while, none of that seemed to matter, because on one single morning, Michael Wittmann did something that turned the legend from a propaganda creation into something that looked a lot like the real thing. It was the 13th of June, 1944, just 1 week after the Allies had stormed ashore on the beaches of Normandy. The British were pushing inland, trying to seize the high ground and crack open the German defences around a small French town called Villers-Bocage. Leading that push was one of the most famous formations in the British Army, the 7th Armoured Division, the legendary Desert Rats, hardened veterans who had beaten the Germans in North Africa. On that morning, a column from their 22nd Armoured Brigade, including the 4th County of London, Yeomanry, a regiment nicknamed the Sharpshooters, rolled forward and halted along the road near a low rise marked on the maps as .213. They felt safe. They were deep in friendly momentum, the enemy seemingly on the back foot, the column stretched out along the road with tanks, half-tracks, and carriers nose to tail. Men climbed out to stretch their legs, and almost no one noticed the single German Tiger sitting hidden in the trees to the side, its commander watching the entire British column lay itself out in front of him like targets on a range. That commander was Michael Wittmann, and what he did next would be talked about for the rest of the century. He did not wait for support. He did not call for the rest of his unit. He simply attacked, alone, driving his Tiger out and opening fire at point-blank range into the packed British column. The first shells smashed into the vehicles at the front and the rear, trapping everything in between with nowhere to run. Then he worked methodically down the line. Tank after tank brewed up. Carriers exploded. Half-tracks were torn apart. The British crews, caught, dismounted and disorganized, struggled to even understand what was happening before their vehicles were burning around them. In roughly 15 minutes, that single Tiger destroyed up to 14 tanks, around 15 carriers and half-tracks, and 2 anti-tank guns. The squadron of the County of London Yeomanry that took the worst of it, a squadron, lost all 15 of its tanks. British casualties for the wider action ran to something like 217 men dead, with more than 40 tanks and vehicles knocked out. One commander, one machine, 1/4 of an hour, and an elite British armoured force had been gutted. You can understand why the German propaganda machine seized on this. Here was the legend made flesh. Here was proof, it seemed, of everything they had been claiming. One perfect German in one perfect tank, smashing the cream of the British Army almost single-handedly. Wittmann was decorated again, promoted, and paraded as the ultimate example of German armoured supremacy. To the men who survived Villers-Bocage, the name Tiger now carried a kind of dread that bordered on the supernatural. But step back from the legend for a second and look at what Villers-Bocage actually proved. It did not prove that the Tiger could win the war. It proved that one Tiger, in one perfect ambush against an enemy that had let its guard down, could do enormous damage. That is a very different thing. The Allies were not going to keep handing the Germans perfect ambushes. And while the Germans had built a handful of Tigers, the Allies were busy answering the problem in a way that was far less glamorous and far more dangerous. They were not trying to build a better Tiger. They were trying to make their ordinary tanks just good enough to kill one. And that answer had a name. The Sherman Firefly. To understand the Firefly, you first have to understand the tank it was built from. The American M4 Sherman was the backbone of the Allied armoured armies. It was reliable, easy to maintain, simple to crew, and above all, it could be built in numbers that defied belief. Factories in the United States poured out Shermans by the tens of thousands. Whole assembly lines that had once built cars now turned out tanks. The Sherman was not a thoroughbred. It was a product of the assembly line, designed to be good enough and available everywhere. The exact opposite philosophy from the handcrafted German Tiger. There was just one problem. The standard Sherman's gun could not reliably kill a Tiger from the front at normal combat range. Its shells tended to bounce off that thick frontal armor, leaving Sherman crews in the horrible position of having to get dangerously close, or flank around the side, or simply pray. Tank for tank, in a straight duel at distance, the Sherman lost. And everybody knew it. The British fix was beautifully unglamorous. They took the standard, mass-produced Sherman hull, the same cheap machine rolling off the assembly lines, and they crammed a much bigger gun into it. That gun was the British 17-pounder, a powerful anti-tank weapon that could punch through a Tiger's armor at the kind of range where the Tiger had always felt safe. It was not easy. The gun was so large they had to rotate it on its side, redesign the mounting, and clear out the inside of the turret to make it fit. But when they were done, they had something remarkable. An ordinary Allied tank that could kill a Tiger at a distance. This is the part that matters, so hold on to it. The Firefly was not a wonder weapon. It was not a secret super tank pulled out of a laboratory. It was a cheap, common Sherman with a bigger gun bolted into it. a field modification, a workaround. The whole point of it was that you did not need a genius commander or a perfect machine to kill a tiger. You needed an average tank, an average crew, and one very good gun. The Firefly took the duel that the tiger had always won and quietly rigged it in the other direction. If you take just one thing from this story, take this. The Germans answered the war with one brilliant machine that almost nobody could build. The Allies answered it with thousands of ordinary machines and one clever fix. And by August of 1944, those two philosophies were about to collide in a field in Normandy, with Michael Wittmann himself standing right in the middle of it. Because, by that point in the summer, the situation in Normandy had changed completely from the one Wittmann had dominated in June. The Allies were ashore in overwhelming strength. Their supplies flowed in across the beaches in quantities the Germans could not match. Their aircraft owned the skies, hunting German tanks and trucks on the roads by day, so that German armor often had to move only at night. The brief window where a single ambushing tiger could rule a battlefield was closing fast. The Germans were no longer the hunters. They were being slowly, methodically squeezed. To break that squeeze, the Allies launched a major attack south of the city of Caen, an operation codenamed Totalize. The plan was to punch through the German lines and drive south toward the high ground beyond. And to stop that punch, the German command threw in its armored reserves, including the Tigers and including Michael Wittmann himself, now promoted and still carrying the full weight of his reputation. On the 8th of August, Wittmann led a group of Tigers forward to blunt the Allied advance near the village of Sintho. And here is where the legend ran headfirst into the new reality of the battlefield. To reach the enemy, Wittmann's Tigers had to cross open, rolling farmland in daylight. No screen of infantry moved ahead of them to spot hidden guns. No cover hid their advance. They simply drove out across the fields, several Tigers in a rough line, toward a tree line and a small village called Saint-Agnan de Cromsnil, and toward a chateau at a place called Gaumsnil. What Wittmann could not see was that the trees and the buildings ahead of him were full of Allied tanks, sitting still, hull down, waiting. Among them was a single Sherman Firefly, commanded by a sergeant named Gordon, with a young gunner in the seat. That gunner was Joe Ekins. Let me tell you about Joe Ekins, because the contrast is the whole point of this story. He was British, born on the 15th of July, 1923, which made him 21 years old that day. Before the war, he had worked in a shoe factory. He was not a celebrated ace. He was not on any magazine cover. He had no string of kills to his name, no reputation that traveled ahead of him. In fact, the 8th of August 1944 was the first time Joe Ekins had ever fired his tank's main gun in combat. He had trained for it, but he had never done it in anger. On one side of that field rolled the most famous tank commander in the German army. On the other side waited a 21-year-old in his very first battle. The German Tigers came on across the open ground, and the waiting Allied gunners held their fire, letting the range close, letting the enemy commit fully into the killing zone. Then, from the trees and the buildings, the trap snapped shut. Ekins, in Sergeant Gordon's Firefly, opened fire at a range of around 800 yards. With that big 17-pounder gun, the gun the British had crammed into an ordinary Sherman, he engaged the Tigers one after another. He hit a Tiger, then another. In a few short, violent minutes, the gunner, who had never fired in anger before that day, knocked out 3 Tigers in succession. The tanks recorded as numbers 312, 007, and 314. The Tiger number 007 was Michael Wittmann's. The shell struck home, and the explosion was catastrophic. The turret of the Tiger was blown completely off the hull and thrown aside. Inside, the entire crew was killed instantly. The most feared tank commander in the German army, the man credited with 138 kills, the living symbol of German armored supremacy, was dead in a field in Normandy, killed in the span of minutes by a former shoe factory worker in his first action, firing a mass-produced tank with a bolted-on gun. The legend was over. But the argument about exactly who ended it has never really stopped. This is where honesty matters more than a tidy ending, so let me be straight with you. The kill credit for Michael Wittmann is genuinely disputed, and it has been argued over for decades. The most widely accepted account, supported by detailed research published in 1985 by Les Taylor and Ken Tout in the magazine After the Battle, points to Joe Ekins and the Firefly of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry. Their work reconstructed the action and placed Ekins' gun as the most likely killer. For many historians, that is where the matter rests. But it is not the only claim on the table. Another version credits the Canadians, specifically the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, whose tanks under an officer named Radley Walters were firing from near the chateau at Goumsnil, only a few hundred meters from where the Tigers died. That is a far shorter range than the British Firefly's 800 yards and more, and supporters of the Canadian claim argue that closeness makes their case. Yet another version raises the possibility of the 1st Polish Armoured Division, also in the fight that day. And still another points to the skies, to the rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft of the Royal Air Force's 2nd Tactical Air Force, which were hammering German armour across Normandy that summer. So who really fired the fatal shot? The truth is that we may never know with absolute certainty. The battlefield was chaotic, the records are incomplete, and different witnesses remembered different things. People have spent careers trying to settle it, and reasonable historians still disagree. But step back and notice something important. The dispute does not actually threaten the heart of this story. Look closely at every single candidate. A British Firefly, a cheap Sherman with a bigger gun, a Canadian Sherman, another mass-produced tank firing from a chateau wall, a Polish Sherman crew, a Royal Air Force ground attack aircraft churned out in the thousands. Every last one of them is a product of the Allied assembly line. Not one of them is a rare, handcrafted superweapon. Whichever version you believe, the conclusion lands in exactly the same place. Michael Wittmann was killed by the cheap, mass-produced industrial machine, not by a better Tiger, and not by a better Ace. The argument is only about which assembly line product got him first. And that is the quiet, brutal lesson buried inside the whole legend. Germany had bet on the masterpiece. One superb tank, one celebrated commander, and the belief that quality could overcome quantity. For one shining quarter of an hour at Villers-Bocage, that bet seemed to pay off in spectacular fashion. But a war is not won in a single ambush. It is won across thousands of fields and thousands of days by the side that can keep replacing what it loses. The Allies could lose a Firefly and have 10 more roll off the line by morning. When Germany lost a Tiger, and when it lost a Michael Wittmann, there was no factory that could simply stamp out another. The story does not even give Wittmann a clean grave to match his fame. For decades after the war, his exact resting place was uncertain. Then, in 1983, during roadworks near Goumsnil, the remains of Wittmann and his crew were finally found in the Normandy soil where they had fallen. They were identified and reburied at the German war cemetery at La Cambe, in Normandy, beneath the same earth where so many of the men he had fought, and the men who had killed him, also lie. The poster boy of German armour ended not as an untouchable legend, but as one more set of bones turned up by a road crew, almost 40 years later. Think about the two images this story leaves you with. On one side, a magazine cover, a polished propaganda hero, a number painted ever higher, 138, a man sold to a nation as proof that the perfect machine could beat the world. On the other side, a 21-year-old who made shoes for a living, sitting in a tank that came off the same kind of line that built family cars, firing his gun in anger for the first time in his life, and blowing the turret clean off the most feared tank in Europe. The legend met the assembly line, and the assembly line won. That is the real ledger of Michael Wittmann, not the inflated tally of kills that the propaganda machine kept adding to. The honest entry is the one written in a Normandy field on the 8th of August, 1944. The Tiger was the better tank in a duel. But the war was never really a duel. It was a contest of factories, and Germany had already lost it. Wittmann just happened to be the most famous man to die, proving the point. If you want to see how the rest of that contest played out, how a handful of brilliant German machines kept winning duels while steadily losing the war, the next chapter in the war ledger is waiting for you on screen right now. Follow along. because the story of who really built the victory is only getting started.